The Great Dive Podcast is hosted by your buddies, James and Brando. So yeah, old Michael Menduno just wrote an article for Dan Europe about Gareth. A little interview with Gareth about how to improve your diving safety and performance. So it's a nice little interview about Gareth, about his human factors stuff, and about the Human Factors Conference that he's got coming up in September that we have graciously been invited to attend and be in the lobby of this virtual conference. Who would have thunk Great Dive Podcast would be on the cutting edge of the technological change and how people meet in 2021.
I think we had a choice, James.
Welcome back to the Great Dive Podcast, everybody. You're here with my good buddy, Under Pressure Brando.
And Captain Safety, James.
If only Jamesy.
If only.
And we are going to talk to you a little bit about your safety and human performance. Discussing a little bit of a recent article by Michael Menduno in the Dan blog with Gareth Locke, who, like we just said, we are going to be in attendance of the Human Factors Conference coming up at the end of September. We hope you drop by and say hi to us in your course of walking through the halls and aisles of this virtual conference coming up.
Have you been to a virtual conference?
It'll be my first one.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you call our monthly Zoom parties a conference.
Well, yeah. No, that's more like a meeting of people with problems.
Yeah, Tuesday morning, I felt like I'd spent an entire day walking the halls of a conference.
You stayed up. I had to tap out early. I always feel bad the night of if I have to tap out early. But the next morning, I'm tap dancing on you guys' grave there because I feel pretty good.
We hit the 3-hour bell, and I called it not long after that. But I did wake up Tuesday reminded of why we switched this to once a month instead of once a week.
Yeah, it was nice to see everybody. We were missing a few of the regulars, but we had some good folks there.
Yeah. So coming up this September, the 24th and 25th, Gareth has a virtual conference that's going to look at the science of human factors, why it's important, and how you can apply it to your regular diving activities, really at any level of diver, from recreational to technical to whatever you are. And you'll probably start to find that you start to integrate it into some other parts of your life. Michael mentions that there's going to be nearly 30 world-class speakers from diving and other high-risk industries such as aviation and healthcare. And they're going to discuss how they have created positive change, sometimes when faced with significant challenges, and how attendees can be inspired to create change in their own diving and their diving community. One of the speakers, anesthesiologist and editor of Diving and Hyperbaric Medicine, Dr. Simon Mitchell, has described human factors as the most important topic today for modern sports diving. And he gives us this interview here with retired senior officer navigator from the British Royal Air Force, good old Gareth Locke, who has been tirelessly trying to bring aviation's rich body of knowledge of human factors and their impact on safety and performance to the sport of diving. He's got a company, The Human Diver, which offers in-person and online courses and webinars, and his new book, Under Pressure, and the recent documentary, If Only, about a tragic, avoidable accident that took place back in 2018 in a training course. And he's slowly building himself a team of instructors teaching human factors around the world. And good old Michael sat down and had a little interview with Gareth, kind of talking about these events that are occurring right now, taking place, and this conference coming up. And we had the great opportunity to sit down and have our very first checkout dive interview was with Gareth back, what was that, like 2 years ago now?
Yeah, it's been a while. Hard to believe. Time flies. Well, that whole COVID year.
Time flies when you're in a pandemic.
Yeah, the COVID year really was like blanked out a whole bunch of time. Whenever you say, oh, yeah, that was a couple years ago, you have to say a couple years ago plus one, because the COVID year was there where nothing happened.
Yeah. So for years, you and I have taken a look with our training at like a kindergarten level, I guess, of human factors when we really started to bring in the concept of situational awareness underwater, right? Would you say that's like the first real foray into where things are not at nowadays with human factors?
Yeah, I guess so.
In a way.
In a way, yeah. In a roundabout way. Yes. Indirect way.
Because it's a concept that first started introducing divers to the concept of you got to see the big picture.
I mean, I think the biggest thing over the years, being involved in different forums, scuba accident forums, things like that, and you look at what happens when an accident happens, what happens on the forum, what happens to the discussion, where does the discussion go typically? And it always ends the same way. So meaning the blame goes on this guy or the blame goes on that guy, and nothing is really happening as far as, are we learning anything from these accidents? Because we aren't. When you just go, okay, this guy should have done this. And you have everybody screaming all this shit, right? Instead of what human factors does is say, what was the behavior that caused the diver to dive this way? What was the environment or the cause of the behavior? What molded this diver into this way of thinking so that they took shortcuts? They, what they call that deviation, that normalization of deviant. You know what I mean?
Right. It's a bigger look
exactly
at the problem. It's not the problem in and of itself. And so human factors is taking that step back to look at everything involved rather than the one actual mistake and who do we blame for that at that very moment.
Yeah, instead of focusing on blame, it focuses on how do we change the way we do things, whether it's training or attitude, or how do you change this stuff? So
yeah, how do we change our game, knowing that we're human and we're going to make mistakes, and mistakes are normal. How do we make it so that we have the open mind and the open awareness? And that's what I was saying, like how like situational awareness is what first making that such a big deal in our classes. It really, in a way, gets you this ability to start opening your mind to think beyond scuba as being so linear in some ways. Right. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to explain without just explaining human factors like Gareth would.
Yeah, because he says one of the difficulties about human factors is that it's such a wide topic, and it's generally applicable to many environments. At its highest level, it's how people interact with technology, with other people, and with the environment, along with things like training manuals, processes, and procedures. The goal is to make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. Yeah, he says one of the things that has come out of the science of human factors, and by the way, he says it is a recognized science, is understanding that our behaviors are massively influenced by the system in which we are operating. So if you design a piece of dive equipment from strictly an engineering perspective, you know how it's supposed to operate. But if an ordinary user gets a hold of it and consistently makes the same mistakes using the unit, well, That is a human factors issue. The problem is you have to take into account how a human will actually interact with it.
Yeah.
And he says similarly, so that's how I would. He says similarly, if you're consistently having failures and faults or things keep going wrong with the training program, then it's not an issue of an individual student with a learning problem. It's a system problem. And so aviation and healthcare and oil and gas and nuclear industries have all recognized that we need to design systems with human performance variability in mind, which is really a posh way of saying we make mistakes.
Posh?
Posh.
Really? Posh. James, I don't know if I've ever heard you use that word. Posh. It's a tactful way of saying we make mistakes.
Well, that's the big takeaway that I have with being introduced recently these last couple of years into Gareth's work is getting people to accept the fact that they're not perfect divers. Even some of the most accomplished divers, are willing to say you're as good as you are. Everybody still makes mistakes.
Yeah, well, people take shortcuts.
You get a little, you make shortcuts. You get a little hot. You cut some corners to get into the water a little bit faster, and it's that snowball effect that I was, bringing into earlier on about the situational awareness of how it's that chain of events.
Yeah.
That leads to the big problem at the end. It's like going back in the links of that chain to see, where the first one started to crack rather than just looking at the problem at the end.
Right. A lot of times it's the underlying behavior that was molded over many years of experience where they deviate from your norm and you live through it. Now you have a new bar. You deviate from your normal safety checks or whatnot, and nothing happened, so you think, well, I don't need to do that anymore. So that's one aspect of it, yeah.
Yeah, Gareth says that we're not consistent in how we execute things.
We're not consistent in almost anything.
Yeah, the human brain is designed to do things the quickest, easiest, most simplified way that it can to be as efficient and require as little work as possible. That's just the way we're wired.
I don't know about that. I know a lot of people who try to do things as complex and with as much work as possible.
Well, they try to.
Yes.
And that's a good thing in many ways. But I mean, like when you fall into just your subconscious taking over pattern, your brain weeds things down as the simplest as possible. Gareth says that if you design a system, be it a hardware, a training system, or a process based around optimal conditions, then you're immediately setting people up for failure because there's so much variability in the individual and group performance. Because you're basing everything to be working on absolute perfection. And we know that rarely is everything ideal and perfect. And that's where it comes to what he does. He says, to counter this, we need a form of feedback, a quality control or quality assurance inside a training system, or once you're outside of the system, an incident reporting system that allows you to capture the details and the context of what happened, that tells a story of how it made sense for a user or a diver to do what they did.
Yes. So you not only need that reporting system, but you need a system or a method of analysis that's A, uniform, and B, isn't just the blame game. Like, well, we analyzed this accident and we found out this diver fucked up. Well, why did he fuck up? Why did he do what he did? Or why did she do what she did? Why did they cut the corners? Where did that come from? Where did that behavior come from? The other part of that is with the system, or with a way of gathering that info, not everybody has to make a mistake to learn from it. In other words, if you have to make the mistake to learn from it, there's a lot of mistakes to be had out there. It could be A, time-consuming, B, very inefficient, and one of those mistakes may cost you big.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what he says. Later on in here, they get to the point where he says that it's great to learn from your mistakes, but It's better if you can learn from somebody else.
Stand on the shoulders of giants, man. That's what I've said it from the beginning.
It all the time. That's going to be on the Brando T-shirt.
It's going to be on my gravestone. He should have stood on the shoulder of a giant before he jumped off that roof with the umbrella. They should have known.
He normally deviated from rational thought.
It's normal.
Look where he is now. Should have stood on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, I think this mistake I think the way he died has already been done before. So, I mean, there's key right there to find a completely unique way to go out. So you can at least teach the world something from your fuck up. You know, if it's already been done, you don't want that. You need to really, really put some thought into how you're going to fuck up.
That's a great philosophical viewpoint, actually.
I want to leave the world a better place than when I came in. And how do you do that? Well, you teach. You teach something. And the way to do that is, the most impactful lesson would be leaving behind a lesson in how not to die from you fill in the blank. And there's a million mistakes being made every day doing shit, and people die from it. So it's really difficult to find that one that somebody hasn't done yet. That's what I'm going to work on.
So you might actually get a PhD for this.
I get an honorary doctorate posthumously. Thank you. I like to use words sometimes.
Posthumously?
Posthumously was what actually popped in my head, and that's why I could not get it out of there. So, yes, posthumously.
But like and I think right along the lines of what you're saying is where they're talking about right now is how you go on Facebook groups or any scuba board groups, and it's the blame game is generally all you get.
And you get a lot of, especially newer divers in there throwing their 2 cents in. And I'm not trying to discourage people from participating in a discussion, but think before you type, think before you speak. Just saying, this diver was a jackass, I'd have never done that. A, it doesn't help anyone. B, you really don't know what happened from a report. You weren't there. You really don't know. And that's why you need people like Gareth, smart and the background in looking at this stuff, developing a system or a method of analyzing incidents that's uniform. It can be applied across the board to many different activities. Like Gareth applies his to the aviation industry, the medical industry, diving, and I'm sure he's got other things too, but those are the 3 that come off the top of my head when I think about what Gareth does. And that's why his human factors really filled a void and is filling a void in the diving industry that has been much needed for decades. You remember the early days, don't you? The forums, the Yahoo groups on accidents, the Deco Stop board on accidents, all of these things, just people getting into these huge.
And it's one thing to just lambaste somebody on a Facebook group that's going to be lost in the breeze,
right?
In the millions of Facebook posts in a week. It's another one when this also carries over into the litigation end too, of lawyers and lawsuits, and somebody's got to be blamed. So, which is why for so many decades, like an accident goes, it tries to get swept under the rug. We don't tell anybody about it. Mm-hmm. I would rather nobody hear about it rather than somebody learn from it, and possibly all of us learn from it, because I'm going to get the blame.
Yeah.
So for years, something goes wrong and it's ignored and thrown in a corner, thrown in the back of the closet.
Yeah, it goes on to maybe one of the, like the Dan accident report or something to that effect, but rarely is it examined, like what created the behavior that caused the mistake. Basically, it's just looked at the mistake, and you say, well, he held his breath when he flew to the surface. He was taught not to do that. Well, I think we have to look deeper. Yes, he made a mistake, but why did he make that mistake? Does it go back to training? Was he not trained well enough? And if he wasn't,
Certainly.
Why? Why wasn't he trained well enough? How do those people fall through the cracks?
Right, because, there's not a single scuba instructor in the world that is going to teach you it's okay to hold your breath and swim to the surface.
I don't know. You give them way too much credit. Especially after that last little, that little Montana. Was it Montana? With the dry suit. Now you look at that on its face, especially. And I know a lot of people know what we're talking about. And basically, it was an instructor putting someone in a dry suit that had no training in a dry suit and never hooked up with their dry suit inflator, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of things that when you read the story on its face and you read the actual court case, your jaw drops because of everything the instructor was doing. As fellow instructors, we go, what? Huh? But I think there's something missing there.
Right. And that's the idea of what Gareth is bringing to us with the human factors of let's step away for a moment and not just look at the fact that, this instructor killed this student because nobody hooked up a dry suit hose.
So many mistakes were made.
How could you? How could you be so negligent?
Yeah.
Throw that person in the slammer for the rest of their life, and it should be a $50 million lawsuit rather than looking at everything else.
Yeah, by the way, the lawsuit was tossed, or there were no consequences for that instructor. So either we don't know all the facts, or there's something more to the story. But yeah, just looking at that story on its face for an example. Yeah, there's so many mistakes that were made in the report, but why? Why were those mistakes made? It's easy to say that instructor's incompetent.
Well, yeah, because it was easy to say that they were incompetent, right? But there's factors of time, there's the factors of money, there's factors of environment, there's factors of the other people involved, like that are all interjecting into, one person thinking one thing, another person thinking another thing. That there's so much that can go into why that accident occurred. And Gareth's point of this is that, we all drift from that normalcy from time to time.
Yeah, drift is a word brought up quite often in Gareth's work, that drifting.
Well, he mentions in the article that he had just wrote an article called Drift is Normal. Being a deviant is normal. And here's why. There's a link to it in this Dan article that we're going through right now. And in it, he mentions that it's similar to normalization of deviance. But he says that we should consider another definition that's wider than just that individual rule and look at the larger scale. He looks at a definition from Diane Vaughan, who developed this when she was studying the Challenger shuttle disaster. She says that social normalization of deviance means that people within the organization become so accustomed to a deviation that they don't consider it as deviant, despite the fact that they far exceed their own rules for elementary safety.
Yes, so it's the normalization of a shortcut or, not following proper procedure becomes normal.
Right. She says the shuttle program was risk managed right up until the point it wasn't, and then the Challenger crew were all lost. And Michael Menduno in the interview says that, so when we do make mistakes, we don't die from them. We need systems designed to prevent or help catch those mistakes and to minimize their overall impact.
You need a mistake filter. It's what you need.
Yeah, and he quotes a buddy of his from the U.S. named Todd Conklin, who said that safety is not just the absence of accidents and incidents. Rather, it is the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of a system to fail safely.
You know you're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail, but how do you fail safely?
Yeah, Gareth says we got to recognize that we're never going to have perfect humans. There's always going to be a possibility of something going wrong.
Well, I think that's what makes us perfect. The very definition of human is that you're not perfect. And that's why if we're all robots, man, what fucking fun is that? So let's embrace our fallibility.
I would say maybe that's not what makes us perfect, but it is what makes us
perfect,
human.
Perfectly human. Let me read.
Okay, there. All right, I get you.
Perfectly human. Yeah, perfect doesn't mean the absence of mistakes in this particular, the absence of fuck-ups, the absence of whatever,
Yeah, it's what makes us truly human
right.
is to know that we are going to make mistakes. And then like building a system that teaches you to look beyond just something so simple of one little mistake, and to think that once you've learned this, you'll never screw up that mistake ever again. But it's, I don't know, maybe I guess it's something as simple as teaching a class and making a big deal about clipping off a long hose.
Well, I was going to just point out too that mistake filter, one of the mistake filters is a really good instructor, a really good teacher, and a really good course where they push you, because that's where you fail safely. You are pushed to failure point in a safe environment under the supervision of an instructor that knows what the hell they're doing. So you have to have those caveats in there. But again, that's a place where you fail safely. And the more safe failures you have in a course, I think will lend itself to you learning. Let them happen under the supervision of an instructor so you can learn from them, versus happening in the real world on a real dive where real consequences are bad.
Yeah, no kidding. And to realize that one mistake is part of the big thing, and not having a huge reaction to a little mistake, knowing that you can, training your body to task load, and training your brain to task load, and training your team to all task load, so that little mistakes don't turn into huge problems should be a key element of training, right? And that's what I meant by something as simple as like
bolt snap, yeah.
The bolt snap, like clip off the bolt snap. You make a big deal about clipping off the bolt snap, and then the next step in that good instructor of that mistake filter, I think, is to then create the situation where, as good as that person is at clipping off the bolt snap, I can still put you in a situation that I can make you forget to clip off that bolt snap and make the problem get worse for everybody, and then still be able to work that team together to solve that next compounding issue.
Yeah, and I think this is where a lot of confusion goes on with the students, as it is viewed as you're picking on them, you're presenting impossible situations, and then you have the students that say, can you give me a list of everything we're going to do so I can practice it and have it done perfectly for class so I won't make a mistake? You just want to say, just come to the class and dive. Wow. And make the mistakes. This is the mistake filter, brother and sister.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you said on the PDF you sent me that the pressure gauge was going to be unclipped after I forgot to unclip my long hose, not before. Like I didn't prepare. I wasn't prepared for that pattern. Well, that's what you're trying to create, right? As much as there is, a system and a pattern, you have to be the real way to work that mistake filter is like comfort in the chaos of knowing that nothing's perfect. Like it's as perfectly as you go through the motions, things go wrong. I mean, how many times have you like clipped off a long hose perfectly, and one time you actually by like a 1 in a million shot, you clip that clip like through the eyelet of a backup light.
Yeah.
And it only is going to occur on the one time that's going to be a major pain in the ass.
Are you talking about that last?
I didn't think anybody saw that.
No, I had to just hold my hands up and go, fix me.
But how many times have you seen in training? I mean, it's not actually a 1 in a million. It actually occurs often. And the problem, or I should say the difference of what you're talking about, is there's a way to react to it like that of, hey, this is beyond my control. Just take care of this real quick.
Can't figure it out.
Versus what most people do is their brain goes totally to that point. They fixate on struggling now with that clip because you can't
as they're
get
descending,
it opened up.
James.
As they're
falling,
plummeting. Exactly. They're plummeting. They've lost sight of everybody. Everything's gone, and they totally break down. Right? Now, who do we blame? The guy struggling with the clip, or the
My
buddy
instructor.
watching him
I'm
go
blaming
away?
an instructor.
Was it his buoyancy? Was it his instructor before?
The instructor that passed me.
Was it? Yeah.
But I like how you put that too. The calm in the chaos, as you said. Being calm amongst all the chaos. And right when you said that, I immediately thought of my normal life here with the 4 children, the guinea pig, the cats, the dogs, a crazy wife. It's chaos.
The calendar that's been the same for 4 months that somehow always changes in your head.
Yeah. Stop. If you ever saw our calendar, like we don't have it here I keep calling this the new house, although we've been here for 4 years. But we had this calendar. It has 4 months on it. Okay, it's a gigantic calendar. It's a dry erase calendar that I made. I put the permanent lines in it to make calendar. We put the dates up, and we fill it in with different colors for different kids and the activities. There's not a single blankety blank. I'm saying blankety blank. I'm not swearing because I am. It used to drive me absolutely nuts. There's not a single day without marks in it, without a bunch of marks. Like you look at it, you're like, how do you even understand this? It's nuts. It's just every single day, every single day, and you look at that and like, it's chaos. It's chaos, but. Thankfully, there's alcohol.
What you're saying
there's alcohol to help with my calm.
What you're saying is it's only natural that you forgot to pick your kid up from soccer practice yesterday.
I can honestly say I never forgot any of the kids. However, I've done stupid left things on the hood of the car because you're in such a hurry. Not a kid. Coffee, clothes. When you're driving down the road and you see a single shoe in the road, and you're like, what the fuck? How? Who? What goes on? That's me. That's us. That's one shoe. There was a pair on the roof of the car. Got my hands full loading the car. I'm like, we got to be 20 minutes away from here in 10 minutes. Okay, I got a 20. What normally is a 20-minute drive, I got to be there in 10 minutes. Peel out, shoes go flying, the coffee goes flying off the back of the car. It's crazy in the car. The music, kids screaming, my wife's yelling at me. I don't even notice that shit's flying out the back. And then we get there, we're like, where's his cleats? He's like, I packed them. He's saying, and I'm like, you're a lying little son of a. No, I'm kidding. I'm like, I don't know. You know where his cleats are? They're in the road, as we discover on the way back. But we only find one of them. I'm like, what the hell? Anyway, that's the chaos. And over years of dulling my reactions, I've actually become more calm within that chaos. And that's a great way to put it, James. Calm in the chaos, because and it's also perception of chaos too. I mean, getting that bolt snap isn't really chaos, but it can cause the narrowing of focus.
Right, that's where the chaos occurs.
Right, and then the snowball goes, right?
Right, exactly. Keeping your head up, keeping your breathing in check, keeping your awareness of your teammates in check, your buoyancy going, and slowly letting the fight with the bolt snap become part of all of that is the way to proceed, versus diving into the bolt snap and forgetting about everything that's going on is only going to lead to that accident chain running out of control.
Exactly. So I don't know if we're deviating from our main topic, but
no, not really, because he says,
"Hey,"
let me do this paragraph, then we'll take a break.
How did you know?
He says, I can tell. We've been together too long. Because he says,
you complete me.
We have to learn to look at both sides of the accident event that takes place. There's something that could go wrong. What do we do to reduce the probability of occurrence so that it's as low as possible, but noting that you're never going to get to zero unless you just don't dive anymore, right?
Yeah. I mean, but that, to me, that's a big one. That's not a zero. That's a big mistake. You can't just quit. I mean, if we have that attitude,
right,
we just won't do anything. Yeah. Humans won't do anything.
He says we then look at what could happen, or, an accident has happened, and consequently, how do we make sure it's not a catastrophic failure?
Right. Fail safely. or safer.
Exactly. And that's the goal and the quest that he's been on with adding human factors into our game underwater. So Michael asks Gareth, what about the recreational diver? Yeah. Like, you're seeing a lot of this occurring in the technical dive community, no doubt about it. But what about just for the recreational divers? And Gareth says, yeah. There's a lot. Gareth says, yeah, brilliant question, right? There's a lot happening in recreational divers now starting to realize this as well.
I don't think he said it like that, though, James. I think it was more like, spot on, mate. Brilliant, mate. A spot of tea for that, eh? With me Beatles. Gareth's probably... If Gareth hears this, I'm sorry, Gareth. I butchered your accent. You're much more well-spoken than that. I don't think he'd ever say, a spot of tea with me Beatles.
No, he's a Zeppelin fan.
I threw you off, didn't I, with my
You
accent?
got me all trying to find. But Gareth says they're all recognizing that there are things that they could do better in terms of their decision-making and understanding how they make the decisions that they do. Communications is a potential critical failure point because that's how we pass information along, he says. When we're stressed, we make greater assumptions on the part of the other people. We cut down the conversation and make the assumption that the other person knows what we're talking about. It's a teamwork issue. Who's doing what, when, and why, and what happens if something goes wrong on a dive. And that doesn't matter if you're doing a technical dive or a recreational dive. You need that critical brain work amongst the people you're in the water with. And that's what takes, in my opinion, that's what takes the hard work of really becoming a diver. It's not learning how to clear a mask. It's not learning how to donate a regulator in an air share. It's that ability to communicate underwater and make sure that all those question marks are taken care of.
I'd agree 1,000%. And part of that, just like on the top side, communication between people is enhanced by being with them more often. Do you ever see, good friends or a good married couple? A lot of times they can answer each other's questions before they even say it, really, And that's the same thing underwater. The more you're with that person, the more communication is enhanced.
Yeah, like right? I just knew you wanted a coffee break.
Exactly. Well, he could see. You could hear it in my voice, the trembling. Do you know where the coffee break came from? The whole idea of the coffee break?
To increase worker productivity, probably, I would imagine.
Well, it was, but it's not as old as you might think, and it happened.
Or it came from the mind of a marketing guy.
No, it was actually a woman suggested it because productivity. It was during the war effort, World War II. Women were taking over a lot of the men's jobs here in the States, doing different type of tasks, right? I'm trying to remember the exact business this was, but the gist of it was they took over and they were doing beautiful work, but they were much slower than the men were. The men are brainless. We'll just keep doing the same task over and over. The women were they put their heart into it, and they were much more detail-oriented, and they were doing the job probably even better than the men, but they weren't keeping up with production. So they thought they were getting tired, so they said, well, we'll give you we'll talk about a break in the day, and one of the women said, what about a coffee and tea during our breaks? And they gave them 2 breaks a day, and production soared. And that's where it was birthed, and then it became known as the coffee break. They get their coffee breaks twice a day. And that's, when they were really learning, wow, coffee increases production. So you get a coffee break. Anyway, not to deviate. I'm deviating. I'm drifting. I'm drifting right
That's
now.
called Brando's normally deviating on us once again.
But a little tidbit of trivia, and the only reason I bring it up is because I just read it like 2 days ago. I thought it was kind of interesting where the coffee break came from.
Okay, so let's try to get back on track.
Oh, here we go. How many times have you said that?
I'm going to start back at the beginning. I read this article today, Brando. It's called "How to Improve Your Diving Safety and Performance."
I want you to reintroduce. I think we need to reintroduce ourselves here. Like, hey, it's the Great Dive Podcast, and you're here with. Let's get back on track, James Z.
And normally deviating Brando.
There you go. See, I like that intro a little better.
All right, there we go. But, so they talk a little bit about how in the technical community and the cave diving community, having the ability for somebody to thumb a dive, they carry off their conversation a little bit, is normal. But it's not really taught in the recreational end of having that psychological competency to realize that something's going wrong as a new diver and be able to say to all the other people that you're with, the more experienced divers, the dive master, the instructor, to see something as a new guy and go, this isn't right. Let's take it home, sort things out, and maybe come back and do another dive later, right? You're taught to follow your leaders in recreational scuba. And that's one of the things that Human Factors is going to help improve, is that ability to have that psychological awareness on a dive that's accepted the more higher and higher ranking you get out of the recreational world. But it's something that the recreational divers need to understand just as much.
Yeah, I think they're very susceptible to peer pressure. When you watch the new divers, they are looking at everybody else, looking for cues on behavior, how they should be acting, right? Especially when they look towards the older veterans. So which, sad to say, a lot of the older veterans would jump in with duct-taped hoses and, fuck it, I'm leaking out of here, whatever. Just jump in and go.
Right. Yeah, I get you. But you got to think of, like, that's often what I think is, what do all these new guys think when they're looking at me in the water? And am I setting a good example? Because
they're thinking
they're clocking that away.
His hair is beautiful. How does his hair stay perfectly slicked back underwater? That's what they're thinking, James.
It's called a commitment to excellence, Brandon.
No, it's called 5W30 or 10W30.
It's called pomade. But Michael says to him, yeah, we need to be able, as divers, to be able to question what's going on at any point in the dive.
Exactly, and it's easier said than done. Everybody says you've got to have that capability to thumb the dive, to question behavior or procedures. You have to have that ability. But yes, in tech diving, in many tech diving classes, not in all of them though, but they do teach that. And I think they go more than just the cursory mentioning it in training. They actually try to put it into effect, right? Try to give scenarios or ask the student, like, when would you thumb this dive? When would you say, I'm not jumping in the water?
Right, but on the open water and the recreational level, that's not really taught at all.
No, they say you can thumb the dive anytime you want. They say it.
But they don't teach somebody how to make that decision, which is where the problem is, right? Because as a recreational diver, like, you're not going to step in the way of a bunch of instructors and dive masters and go, whoa, you think this is a good idea? You're going to feel like an idiot.
Yeah. A number of stories we've talked about involving instructors and students, and in looking at them from the hindsight, obviously, you can see where the student had reservations about doing anything. Of course, it's hard.
Right.
It's hard to filter out the reservations from nervousness to a real potential problem.
Right, but if the culture has never been established
Exactly.
that it's okay for that student to make the question,
Right.
versus it's always do what I say when I say
Exactly.
it. Do as I say, not as I do, or even, it makes it hard.
Well, just like that.
But what Gareth and Michael are having the conversation of right now is that, no, man, it's applicable in all diving, recreational diving as much as technical diving anywhere.
Well, look at our.
We need to have like a place where instructors and dive masters and boat captains all agree that we should have this open discussion with the new guys as well, so that they learn a comfort in that from the beginning.
Yeah, just look at our last episode with the student doing a complete open water class without confined water, in open water, in 60, 80 feet of water, right? Or 40 feet of water,
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just because you're shallow doesn't mean you're void of risk.
No, you're still underwater. You can't breathe there. That's not human capability yet. I'm working on it.
Have you become an investor in that new aqua breather hydroid helmet mask? Is that what you mean by that?
No.
I mean, a couple years ago, I was teaching a class down at our training quarry, and there was a guy that died in 25 feet of water in full tech diver gear. In doubles. Everything. He had over 200 cubic feet of gas on him, and died just off the dock in 20 feet of water. So it doesn't mean that like staying shallow means I'm safe.
Right. You can just be blatantly abusing
When
of
you
the
look
rules.
at some of our past accident report studies we've done, a lot of the fatalities are occurring to new, shallow, open water, recreational divers. So it's not a matter of, this is something that I need because I'm now going to become a technical diver.
Exactly. You can't stress that enough. Actually, I think it's even more critical that we look at it and we begin this teaching. I don't want to say how to think, but we start teaching this behavior and attitude from day one of Open Water 101.
Well, yeah. How about even so much as when an instructor swims from platform 1 to platform 2 and loses 3 divers along the way, and it's the student's fault, right? My fins say clearly on the bottom, follow me. How did you get lost? But yeah, mistakes can happen anywhere. Underwater.
Anywhere. Topside, underwater. And a lot of times the mistakes begin topside. And again, like I say, it would be extremely beneficial to start to ingrain this at that very base layer of your pyramid of knowledge of diving, which is how I kind of look at diving education. It's a pyramid. And that base, the very bottom, needs to be solid. And it needs to be the critical fundamentals and attitude and behavior, thought, behavior, thinking, attitude, thinking, and behavior are key.
Yeah, Gareth says that the whole point of these programs is to set people up for success so that they can make better decisions and they can communicate more clearly. The idea being that they can develop their own knowledge so they've got the experience to be able to question or challenge. In effect, they're learning from somebody else's mistakes. There's a quote that I put on one of my early marketing posters which said, "It's great to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from somebody else's because you can't make all those mistakes yourself."
You can try. You can give it a
I've
shot.
I've been going at it for years. But he says, that's one of the biases that we have as humans is that we tend to say, hey, I'm not like that. I'm different. I wouldn't make those mistakes.
I know good divers that say that.
I think, and that's what Gareth is saying, it's human nature kind of. Like we get caught up in that, as a mass of humans.
Here's the greatest thing you can tell yourself. is look in the mirror and go, I'm not special. I'm not special. I know your mommy's been telling you different, but you look in the mirror and say, you're not fucking special. You make mistakes and you're going to make mistakes. So stop thinking it can't happen to you or you wouldn't do that.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings. We're all fuck up human beings that have just on any given day to make any of these same mistakes.
That is one of the nice things about the military is you learn real quickly. You are not special. You are replaceable. And I know people are like, when my mommy said I was special. You're not. You're not. Maybe to her, in her eyes, you are special. But in the world of the world, right? You are just another.
I think that place is called reality.
Yes. You are not special. You will make mistakes. You do make mistakes. And it can happen to you. And if you keep the attitude that it can't, it will happen to you. That's Murphy.
Yeah. And I think what Gareth was bringing up about, we do have that individual bias about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to bring this understanding of that social normalization of humans are humans and humans make mistakes. And if we sit there and keep putting together a system that's based on everybody doing the right thing when the right thing needs to be done, instead of looking at every one of these steps as a possibility of something going wrong and just hoping that it's never going to, is we're just setting ourselves up for more problems in the future.
Agreed.
Now, Michael says to him, you've introduced a couple of terms to the diving lexicon, psychological safety and just culture, and asks him to elaborate on those a little bit. Gareth answers him by saying that psychological safety, which is a proactive bit, that's the environment we create that attempts to stop or minimize adverse events or accidents from occurring. We feel included. We feel we can make minor mistakes and learn from them in a positive way. We are able to contribute as part of a team, and ultimately, we can challenge the plan if things are going wrong. That's the proactive side. And he says the just culture component is the reactive side. It requires that psychological safety that we were just talking about. But if we have had an accident or made an error or something went wrong, people will judge us for being incompetent. The idea of a just culture is recognizing that everybody is fallible and makes mistakes. It's very easy to focus on what went wrong, but that rarely helps us learn. We need to be able to understand how people made the decisions and took the actions they did at that time so that we can learn from them. And that's what he means by just culture.
Yeah, the just culture thing has become more and more accepted, if that's the right word, but it's out there more. Over the past decade or so, people are starting to look at accidents and instead of just immediately pointing a finger, they're trying to analyze the behaviors and the system in place that caused the person to behave, the way they did. But it's still, the blame game is still out there.
Right, but it's like 10, 20 years ago, that's all there was. And I think, Garrett's been doing a good job of starting to open people's minds to understanding this, right?
Because he's smart. And the people that do the blame game thing, and I've been there. I've been, especially my early days, I would read a report and go, well, what the fuck were they doing here? Why were they doing this? It seems so apparent, but it took a smart guy to look at this stuff and say, listen, saying that he didn't have the correct weighting is easy, but why didn't he have the correct weighting? That will prevent it. You have to learn why the behavior is there. Why did he make them? Why did he do the fuck up that is at the cornerstone of the fatality? And that's where the whole just culture thing comes and looks at analyzing what caused the behavior.
Yeah, Gareth mentions that we're starting to see it more and more in the community on little stuff,
right?
But there's still a tendency, like we just saw on the case that you're talking about.
Yeah, the Montana one.
When it's a big one, it's people go back right to that blame game.
Yeah, everybody chimes in, James, and a lot of them don't have the experience knowledge to really be chiming in. It's very easy to say, oh, this instructor did that, and that student did this wrong, and they did this wrong.
Right, because they go back to their own individual bias that we talked about a minute ago. It's easy for me to go, well, I would never do that.
I would never have a problem with a bolt snap.
I don't make those kind of mistakes. But that's where you've set yourself up for the potential down the road. Is the smart way to go is realizing that on any given day at any given moment, I could easily make a dumb mistake.
I could fuck up, yeah. That's what I like about a couple little built-ins that we do. I mean, we have Rule 6, and everybody, Rule 6 is, you want to look cool. It's a fun little saying, but it's way deeper than that.
It's way deeper.
Yes, and it builds a behavior, it builds a mentality and an attitude of your diving. So it's very helpful as a mistake filter. It catches things before they snowball.
Exactly. Right? And it's as much as it is about looking good and looking cool underwater, that's the real underlying component of it, is having your shit together. Being aware, not letting, a spool dangle out of a pocket because you thought you tucked it in and it fell out and you can't see that, and nobody else picking it up. And then later on, that spool is now tangled everybody into a ball of shit.
A ball of shit, eh? Yeah, so we have that one. We have, Murphy is always my invisible dive partner. Yeah, I always dive with the team, with a buddy, but I actually always dive in threes, at least threes, because Murphy is my invisible dive partner. And Murphy basically is, if something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen at the worst possible time and when you least expect it and under the worst possible conditions. It's always going to be the worst it possibly could be. So if you have Murphy with you, you constantly are vigilant on keeping Murphy in check. It's fun in a way of, you chuckle about it, but it has a very big effect on the way you do your diving or whatever it is you're doing.
Well, yeah, it's just the assumption of always starting with the idea that this might not be an ideal day. And what do I do if? What do I do if? Rather than just getting into the water or getting into your activity thinking everything's going to be happy, holding hands, hunky-dory, everybody's smiling. Look how perfect the s'mores came out. Everybody just pass around a s'more and let's sing a song.
You got s'mores?
Because it's perfect.
You got s'mores and songs. Your diving sounds more like a Bible camp jamboree.
That's exactly. Hell yeah!
Hell yeah! Satan be gone.
Yeah, Gareth says that although we're growing, we're not there yet.
Are we ever going to be there? We're like an asymptote. You're never going to reach perfection. You're gonna have that curve approaching the line, but it never reaches that line. You're never going to be there. That's, again, go back to what I originally said, is our imperfections make us perfectly human. So, yeah, we're never going to get there. Yeah, but
as we slowly start to change the community, we're going to get closer and closer to that just culture where we can get out of that blame game. And he mentions in here that there's a quote from Dr. Nancy Levison, who is a professor of the systems engineering at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that she says that blame is the enemy of safety. But yeah, this is a cool little article that you guys should go ahead and check out. We kind of paraphrased and perused through it. There's a little bit more in there to read. They go on to talk a little bit more about the actual upcoming Human Factors Conference that's coming up. Like, again, the 24th and 25th of September, where he's going to have, he said, about 30 people on there, talking. He's got, again, Dr. Simon Mitchell's going to be there. A lady from British Petroleum who came in after the big Deepwater Horizon disaster a few years back. An astronaut trainee, ex-commercial airline pilot, a guy from the Norwegian military, guy from Northeast Public Safety Divers, coming in and doing a whole bunch of stuff, just talking about, human factors in their industry and how they're starting to adopt it into their different industries and how that will work as it makes its way more and more into the scuba world. We're going to be there hanging out in the lobby where you can kind of talk. You can talk and socialize. I guess it's
an open bar.
Interesting. In fact, there is an open bar. There's a virtual bar. He says, that you can hang out and have cocktails.
Is there a cigar lounge?
There is. There's a cigar lounge around back.
Nice.
But it's going to be fun. I'm kind of interested in to see how the format works out. It's going to be pretty cool. It's 8 hours a day over 2 days, presenters all over the globe, live, virtually face to face, where you can. So it's pretty slick, how it's going to go. So yeah, you can go to Human Factors in Diving Conference. I'm sure if you Google that, you'll find it, or it's hf-in-diving-conference.com is the link. But yeah, we'll try to throw a link up on our, show notes or the description of this show. Or you can always go over to Gareth's website, The Human Diver, too. So all right, everybody. We will see you next week, maybe at the conference too. Stop by and say hi to us. Should we sign logbooks, Brando?
Yeah, we better sign logbooks.
Okay, let me see. Brando, I can tell you've been under pressure lately. Nice dive, though.
Dear Jamesy, stop blaming me.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Safe diving, folks.
My great legs burn.